You're listening to the Mastermind Parenting Podcast with Randy Rubenstein, episode 53. Well, hi guys, how are you today? Today I have a topic that I know is going to interest a lot of you guys, and it's all about homework and my thoughts about homework, how we should manage it, the mindset, the mind mastery piece around homework, which is so important, I think, as parents to really just have clarity about what your role is when it comes to your kids' homework and how to kind of keep yourself in check so that you don't accidentally add to their overwhelm. And I think it takes practice, and I don't think that we necessarily have gotten the right messages about what our role is as a parent when it comes to homework. And this is completely subjective. This is all my opinion. My kids are 21, junior in college, 17, junior in high school, and 13, seventh grade. I have 3 different kids, 3 different learning styles, 3 different temperaments, and they are all very similar students. And so I'm now kind of at a point where I'm like, I think we kind of have it down in terms of how we've managed the homework situation. And I just think that it's, the goal is we want our kids to own their work. We want them to be self-motivated. And I do have 3 kids who all are readers, who all are self-motivated. I don't think I've looked at a report card in years. Like, if they get a grade that they're not particularly thrilled with, they're going to beat themselves up. They tell us about it. My husband does kind of look at progress reports and informs me of them, but I don't feel the need to, because my kids tell me about it just as like a side note, because if they got a grade that they don't really feel proud of, like, they're already beating themselves up, and it's really just information of how we can show up and help coach and support them. And so they inform me of it. So, I think that many of us grew up, and like when I was growing up, like, I don't recall a time ever where my parents helped me with my homework, like, ever. And I was a good student. I didn't have any learning differences. I had this drive and determination to be a good student from, I don't know, as far back as I can remember. So I do know that there was that going on, but there was never, ever a time my parents helped me with my homework. And I grew up, in the 70s and 80s. So I just think it was just kind of, back then it was kind of the thing, but we're more parents than not, we're pretty hands off. It was just kind of a sign of the times. But I do remember having certain friends or knowing certain people whose parents were super involved and just on top of whatever was going on for them in school, volunteered at school, and maybe like, oh my gosh, like the parents that even knew the teacher. Like, I don't even know that my parents knew my teachers' names. And so I do, as a kid, remember wishing that my parents were more involved. And it's interesting because as I've talked to, air quotes, those kids with those parents, it's pretty interesting because most of them say that constant hand-holding and involvement was really not the way to go either. They felt like it was like helicoptering before helicoptering was a thing. And so a lot of those kids I know were resentful, and I'll hear them say that they think it enabled them maybe not to be as responsible as they wish they'd been. And they thought it was kind of a crutch. And so there's that. And then a lot of times they're doing the same things with their kids, and it's just kind of almost like what I call a limiting belief. Like, they believe that that's your job as a parent. So even though they didn't necessarily feel like it was a good thing for them, they repeat the pattern and do the same exact thing with their kids because they think that's what you're supposed to do as a parent. Like, that's your job as a parent, is to sit with your child day in and day out and do their homework and check their homework. And that's part of the responsibility. And so what I want to kind of really tell you today is that I think there's a happy medium when it comes to our role as parents, when it comes in terms of homework. And it's about being supportive when our kids need some extra help while also fostering independence and responsibility. Because the truth is, like, we're not going to college with them, right? They really do need to learn how to be independent students. And if you feel like your child's homework is your homework, it's a sign. It's a sign that something needs to shift, because you aren't in second or fourth or 11th grade. Your child is, right? Like, they are a separate person from you. And you've already gone through all that. It's now their turn. It's now their experience. And like I like to say, we don't own our kids, right? Like, owning people is called slavery. They are their own people. We don't have the right to try and control them and to behave in a way where we think we're responsible for their experience. Their experience has to be their experience. And yes, your child may have learning differences. I have kids with learning differences. And if you find yourself feeling defensive about why their learning differences justifies the need for you to sit with them day in and day out and manage their workload for them, I'd like to invite you to explore a few questions, right? I'm not doing this from a preachy place. Honestly, I'm doing this from a place of, it's so exhausting to take on your child's workload as if it's your own. Like, you have a life and you've got a lot going on. So to take on their homework and the responsibility of their homework, it's too much, you guys. This is why you're going to find yourself in the parent gap, where you're yelling or berating or doing things that you swore you were never going to do, and adding to their workload, adding to their overwhelm, because you've crossed the line into things that are really their business and not your business. And so when you do that, that's when you find yourself just completely mentally drained and exhausted. So I want to invite you guys to ask a few questions if you are feeling defensive, or if you are feeling like it is your job to sit with your child day in and day out because they have such tremendous learning differences that they need that level of support. So number one, is your child in the right school? Number two, have you communicated with the school and teacher and advocated for the right kind of support for your child and the way their brain is meant to learn? Because remember, they're spending 7 to 8 hours a day at that school. And if your child's not spending that time learning the way their brain requires, like, that's a hell of a lot of wasted time. So it's really, really important to understand how your child is meant to learn, and helping advocate for them to be in the right learning environment. So if it's not the right school, right, like, exploring other options. I mean, we live in this day and age where I was just talking to a mom the other day who was telling me that her child is in a phenomenal school in DC, but unfortunately, it's not the right school for his learning style. It's too big. There's just a number of reasons. And so he comes home at the end of the day and he's just melting down and falling apart. And so all this time, this little boy is spending sitting in a desk, and it's just like wasted time. And so she said she's exploring some different options. There's some cool Montessoris and things around. And she said, and I've also looked into the homeschooling community. Like, we live in DC. There's museums that have specific classes for people that homeschool their kids. There's lots of moms who homeschool their kids that hire babysitters to drive them to and from. The zoo offers like a half-day program for homeschooled kids. There's this other cool program where you literally, it's like an entire day, 8 to 5, where you sign your kids up, you drop them off, and they like have a day exploring in the woods and learning out in nature, like all these super cool things. And so she's like, so basically you're just, instead of dropping your kid off at a school, you develop the curriculum, and there's all these cool programs. I was like, wow, that is a very different idea than what I thought homeschooling was. Because this is a woman that runs her business. So I was like, how are you going to have time to be the teacher too? She's like, it doesn't have to work like that. So there are so many options to think outside of the box. And I think it's really important to do so if homework is the bane of your existence and it just seems like your child is not getting what they need to accomplish during those 7 to 8 hours a day. Like, really, we live in this day and age where we don't have to waste that time anymore if we're willing to think outside the box. So think back in your own life to the things you've accomplished, right, and felt proudest about. Like, was there a challenge involved that you overcame? And how did you do it? Were you scrappy and resourceful? Or was someone holding your hand helping you figure it out? So if your child is constantly challenged by school and you're feeling like it is your job to sit with them day in and day out, doing their work as if it were your work because they need that support, I just want you to consider in your own life, when you have accomplished something that you feel really proud of, like, did you have to rely on yourself more? Did you have to find the resources? Because when we deny our kids that same success story that they get to look back upon by constantly coddling and hand-holding, like, we're not building them up. We're not helping to create resilience in them. Right? We're accidentally enabling them to stay stuck. So, like, the other thing I want to talk about is about reading. I have people all the time, and my daughter tells me this, how people just marvel. She was on a school trip recently, and it was this camp, and it was really cool. It's gorgeous, and she's reading a couple of different books right now. She's a major reader, and so she's reading Pride and Prejudice right now, and it is like, I mean, if it doesn't look like a school book, it is like the tiniest print. And she was sitting out under this tree, and she was just kind of just enjoying just a minute and reading. And she said some of her friends came up and they're like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "What do you mean? I'm sitting here reading." And they were just like, they thought it was the oddest thing in the world. And let me tell you, my daughter, they couldn't have cell phones on, which was so awesome. She loves all things teenage girl, Snapchat and all the social media, and can do all that stuff. But they weren't able to do that. So she was like curled up with a good book, and the other kids thought that was like bizarro. Okay. So I think that the whole thing that comes from the best of intentions, where teachers are telling kids that they have to read for 15 minutes a night, and then there's that AR program, accelerated reading program in elementary school, and they're keeping track of the points and all these ways of incentivizing kids to read, and then putting it on the parents' plate to make sure they get their reading in and all that stuff. I think it's accidentally sabotaging our kids' love of reading. Because a good book, think about it, like, we all are wired for story. That's why we love movies. And many of us who have been readers in our lives, like, think about when you've gotten into a series and it's like, you're so sad when the series is over. There's nothing like a great story. So our kids, especially kids, they learn so much through story. So all of these ways that we're putting in these external motivators, we sabotage their intrinsic love for story, for reading. That's the best way I've seen to foster a love for reading is to not keep track of that and just get your kids hooked on a series. Like all my kids, the first series any of them were hooked on was a series called The Magic Tree House. And they've just gone from series to series to series. And that is how you foster a love for reading. And when they are reading and you're having to tell them lights out, it's enough with the reading, like think about all the skill building they're doing from that. So that's one of my pointers that I would say is stop keeping track of how many minutes they read. And if you want your kids to read, like be consistent from the time they're early with bath, books, bed, and get rid of the screens in the evening. Like go hardcore on the quality and connection time and have a hard stop of like 8 p.m., especially when your kids are little. Like in my household, 8 p.m. has always been when the adult time started, period. From 8 p.m. till 7 a.m., that is my time. That is adult time. And when my kids, when they were little, we would read to them and we would read next to them. And then when they started to read, they would read and we would read. And then when they were full-fledged reading to themselves, the books before the actual going to sleep part was they laid next to us and like they read something and we read something to ourselves. And like we just enjoyed independent reading time together. So, another thing is have your older kids that start to read to their younger siblings. Let them have that quality connection time without you, but really making it a beautiful time. Like it was always so fun when my kids had started to read and I would sit. I remember I used to be a big People magazine reader. Such trash, but I loved a good People magazine back in the day. And I would sit and I would just read my magazine and it was a special treat. They got to lay in my bed and they would lay in our beds and they were all showered and delicious smelling and they would lay next to us and they would read their book and my husband would be reading his thing and I'd be reading my People magazine and there was no talking. It was just like quiet connection time. So that's what I have to say about reading. Stop doing your kids' homework with them. And when you stop doing it and they become more responsible, then you can show up for periodic support and be the hero that swoops in when they really need you, right? Like once you've really fostered that responsibility, like have a few rules in place. I think mine was like, don't ask me to quiz you for a test until you know it so well that you're convinced you're going to get 100. So when I'd start to quiz them, if they missed one, I'm like, looks like you need to go back and study some more. Come back when you think that you're all studied up. I'm there as an extra checks and measures if they need me, but they're fully responsible for preparing themselves. And then I'm there if they want just to, have an extra quizzer. And I'm not against tutors or resources at all. I'm against needy, overly dependent kids. So, and the other thing I want to say is, like, why does everyone need to be an A student? Like, I know a lot of successful people that were straight up C students. And, y'all remember, our world is changing so fast. So your kids that have learning differences, we need to build them up rather than tearing them down by over coddling them and pushing everyone to be, an A student or an extraordinary student. Right? Because those over-coddled kids, they're going to end up possibly getting into a college, and I've seen this many times, that is actually academically too difficult for them. And you're not going to be there with them to catch them when they inevitably fail. And so, you might still continue to hire tutors from afar and help manage them and be completely stressed out. But then your kid's going to be left feeling like they're going to see all the other kids around them. And then inside they're feeling like a less than cheater. Like, wouldn't it just be better to teach them to advocate for themselves and to believe that there's absolutely nothing wrong with them because they're a non-traditional learner, and to embrace how they're wired and to understand that it's their superpower? Like, I really believe this. ADHD, shiny object syndrome. Guess what those people are? They're the solution people on the team. They're the ones who don't live in complacency. They're the ones who constantly are searching for better engagement and something to be more interesting. And why don't we try this? And why don't we try that? If people that struggle with anxiety, the nervous kid, well, I've never met anyone that struggles with anxiety that isn't highly intuitive and feels energy and has a good read on people. So we need to teach our anxious kids that that's actually their superpower. Dyslexic or dysgraphic kids, out of the box thinkers, creative, gifted, and able to see patterns that other people miss in life. So where else are they able to see patterns that can't be seen? Like, where's the metaphor there for our kids that are the out of the box thinkers? And what about our kids that are the black and white thinkers or our super high functioning spectrum kids? Like, they're the ones who seek order and hold others accountable about order and rules and how things need to be followed. Maybe they're the ones that bring in civility. So I think when it comes to homework, it serves our kids to bring back some of that old school mentality that many of the parents of yesteryear had. Like, allow them to figure it out. Stop being overly invested and remember, this is your kid's life, not yours. Your job is to be the guide on the side. And yes, this might involve a few bad grades or missed assignments, but I promise a 0 on a homework assignment in 2nd or 4th or 7th grade does not equate to not going to college, because there's 5,300 colleges. That's 5,300 colleges alone in the US. It's going to be fine. Your kid's going to go to college. And who even knows if college is going to be a necessary thing 15 years from now? So that's what I've got for you on homework. Stop sitting with your kids while they do their homework. If you're doing this, it's a sign that things need to shift. If your child has learning differences, advocate by communicating with their teacher that they need to get the resources during the 7 to 8 hours during their school day that they're there. And if your kid's in the wrong learning environment and homework's the bane of your existence, find a better situation, because it's 2019 and we have this awesome resource called the internet, and there are many different virtual educational options. Turn off the screens at night and read with and or next to your kids, and stop timing them on how long they read for. And if you don't know how to make these shifts or have these hard conversations, reach out to me for support, you guys, because this is all so figure outable. Like, that's what I want to say. We can completely change the way it's going right now. And I now can speak from a place of, I've been there. I get it. And there's a better way. If you're stressed out about your kids' homework, it's not your homework, it's theirs. Okay, have a great week. Bye-bye.